India is a very diverse nation. The nation has numerous ethnicities, cultures, and religions. India shares a common history with many nations around it, especially Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka, who became independent from the British Empire around the same time and shared previous political and cultural connections. The island nation of Sri Lanka, lying off India's southern tip, shares a similar cultural, ethnic, and linguistic history with parts of India. However, Sri Lanka became independent from the British Empire and joined the Commonwealth in 1948. Considering the shared history and geographic proximity of the two nations, why isn't Sri Lanka a part of India? The Indian subcontinent has a long and complex history. Its religious, cultural, economic, and political history is extensive. It has also been a crucial crossroads for Western and Eastern interaction, being host to some of the most important historical events in world history. The island of Sri Lanka, like any other part of the region, had its unique experiences. History is about the past events of the entire world, cultures, but also languages. That's why we chose to partner up with Babbel, today's sponsor. Sometimes it is very hard to learn a new language. Taking normal courses or reading through a dictionary might seem frustrating and time-consuming. Babbel, on the other hand, is an incredible learning app that you can use to teach yourself a new language. Overcoming the language barrier when you want to travel, develop your career, or connect with a friend or family is possible, and way easier to achieve with Babbel. During a trip to Italy, I felt embarrassed for not being able to understand Italian to help the person in front of me who was asking for directions. Dove posso trovare un parcheggio? Learning his language with Babbel, even for a few minutes a day, would have been extremely helpful. So I could respond with lungo la strada a destra. With just 10 minutes a day, Babbel can help you speak like a local on the trip of a lifetime. The lessons are created by over 650 real language experts, not AI, so you learn practical, real-world conversations in no time. Babbel takes on the role of a personal language coach, guiding learners towards real-life conversations in their target language. At the same time, Babbel offers a 20-day money-back guarantee for users who decide it's not the right fit. Just write to customer service within 20 days for a full refund. Click on my link in the description to get up to 60% off of your subscription and start speaking a new language in 3 weeks with Babbel. Historically, the two main groups in Sri Lanka are the Sinhalese and the Tamil people. The Sinhalese people speak Sinhala, a member of the Indo-Aryan language family. The Tamil people speak Tamil, a member of the Dravidian language family. Buddhism reached the island around 250 BC. Sri Lanka was host to local and foreign dynasties. Some important ancient sites were Anuradhapura and Polonnaruwa. The cultural and political situation of post-medieval Sri Lanka, like in India, would be radically changed after the area began to be frequented by European traders and soldiers. Sri Lanka's national destiny was fundamentally influenced by its time during the colonial period. European colonial powers entered the scene on the Indian subcontinent in the beginning of the 16th century. These empires were keen to find new economic inroads, and eventually the majority of the region would be under the control of one of the many colonial empires. Portugal was the main power on Sri Lanka from the early 1500s, until the Dutch replaced them in the mid-1600s. The British Empire entered the scene in the late 1700s, and in 1815 conquered the Kingdom of Kandy. By 1833, the island now called British Ceylon was united under British rule. Understanding British rule in the area is crucial to understanding why Sri Lanka remained nationally separate from India. Eric Meyer, in Towards a Comparative History of Sri Lanka and India, lists several examples of how British Sri Lanka was different from British India. Some of the main reasons he lists are the prevalence of Buddhism, the prolonged and extensive colonial rule, the separate colonial administrative history from India, and the extent and nature of the nationalist movement on the island. Buddhism was supported by the pre-colonial monarchy of Sri Lanka. This separated it from India due to the growth of Brahmanism and Islam in India. From another standpoint, the prolonged rule of European colonial powers on the island heavily affected the economy of the region. Sri Lanka's economy under Britain was a plantation system where products such as tea, coffee, and rubber were produced. The revenue of British India was based on peasant agriculture and climate fluctuation, while the revenues of British Sri Lanka were based on these plantations. The independence movement of the two nations had different fates. According to Meyer, the Sri Lankan nationalist movement contained strong sentiments of independence from India. The situation in Sri Lanka was also evidently interesting due to the fact that the British government transferred authority over to the local elites. When World War II broke out, British Sri Lanka had a unique impact due to the fact that the island's resource production was particularly valuable to the war effort. According to Padmaja Murthy in Indo-Sri Lankan Security Perceptions, Divergences, and Convergences, Sri Lanka's independence could have been threatened by the strategic value it could have given India. The island lies in an important geographical position for maritime travel, trade, or otherwise. The British were evidently aware of this fact and viewed Sri Lanka as an important asset for the defense of India. Some Sri Lankans saw this path leading them towards losing independence and becoming part of India. This arguably led to the creation of a special defense pact with Britain on November 11, 1947. According to Murthy, some believe that this defense pact's actual primary purpose for the Sri Lankans was to speed up the nation's independence. Britain was interested in controlling the island due to its strategic significance, and Sri Lanka would also receive military security and training from the British military. This pact also gave Britain an ally in the region, something it needed considering its increasingly weak position. This was an important step towards independence. After the war, the British colonial authority in the area began to waver. During the war, Winston Churchill, the Prime Minister of Britain, sent the Cripps mission in order to negotiate with Indian nationalists. This mission, although it ultimately did not achieve its goals, arguably began serious talks concerning Indian independence. The new British Prime Minister after Churchill, Clement Attlee, in 1946, sent a delegation to discuss the creation of an independent India that would also protect British interests in the area, but it failed. Viceroy Louis Mountbatten determined to move India's independence date from 1948 to August 1947, and so, ultimately, a combination of factors, including non-violent resistance to British rule by leaders such as Mohandas Gandhi and Jawaharlal Nehru, paved the way for India to become independent from the British Empire in 1947. The partitioning of India and Pakistan took place at this time as well. Sri Lanka received its independence after India. Meyer states that this later date was due in part to the prioritization of the Indian movement over its Sri Lankan counterpart by the British authorities. Although steps were taken during the war to address Sri Lanka's constitution, Britain was seemingly not ready to allow full independence. The Ceylon State Council refused to officially meet with a British commission sent to discuss the matter, due to their desire to see Sri Lanka become truly independent. The man who would become Sri Lanka's first Prime Minister, D.S. Senanayake, was behind many of the negotiations that led to Sri Lanka's independence. And in 1948, due to all of these factors and historical events, independence became a reality. Examining Sri Lanka's history through the ancient and colonial periods shows that Sri Lanka has historical reasons for being separate from India. Early on, the religious identity of many of its inhabitants, combined with its unique cultural and linguistic history, made the region different from its neighbors. As time progressed, Sri Lanka's colonial history also set it apart from India in several different ways. The island was controlled by the Portuguese, the Dutch, and the British, with the latter having the most impact and influence on its path towards nationhood. The influence on Sri Lanka's economic history, the implementation of plantations to produce items such as tea, coffee, and rubber, set the Sri Lankan economy apart from the colonial economy of India. Because of this development, Sri Lanka had a unique role in World War II, due to its production of these items for the Allied war effort. Ultimately, the Sri Lankan independence movement, while having parallels to events in India, leaned toward a separate identity, and Sri Lanka became an independent nation and not a part of India.